Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Your commitment to advancing mental health care is truly inspiring. At Iconotes, we're passionate about providing mental health professionals like you with the most clinically robust and intuitive mental health care software available. From psychiatrists to therapists, nurse practitioners to social workers, Iconotes offers a comprehensive solution tailored to your practice's needs. With Iconotes, you can write a flawless note in less than 3 minutes, and without typing a single word. Iconotes was designed specifically to help mental health professionals write comprehensive notes quickly. Iconotes also provides a complete practice management solution with user-friendly scheduling, secure document management, HIPAA-compliant messaging, a certified patient portal, and more, so you can spend less time on paperwork and more time helping your patients. Try us free at iconotes.com/try-us.
Welcome, everyone. We are so glad to have you here this morning. We have a great presentation for you. Thank you for everyone who are commenting in the polls. We've got people from all over the place joining us today: Canada, Puerto Rico, Virginia, Michigan. Wow, this is awesome. Well, we're so glad you're here. We have a great presentation on group therapy with a surprise little presentation at the end. We have a little sneak peek into our group therapy notes in our Plus system. So Sanjeev is going to be joining us later today. But today, this morning, I want to introduce you to Kaylee Crone. If you've seen her in some of our other webinars, you know that she is a dynamic speaker and always presents great information for you. And today we'll be talking about effective group therapy design. Kaylee Crone is a licensed master social worker and certified grief counselor. She's worked as a grief counselor at nonprofit hospice, guiding individuals through their grief journeys. She's currently serving as an author, speaker, and organizer of events that provide space for acknowledging and processing grief. She's been featured in various media outlets, including articles, podcasts, and magazines. And she holds a master's in social work. And we are so happy to have her here. Welcome, Kaylee. And I'm going to turn the reins over to you.
Thanks so much, Angela. It's good to be back. It's good to be here. As Angela mentioned, my background is in grief. And so group therapy and support groups are such an essential component to the work that I've done over the past decade of my life. And so I'm thrilled to talk with you all. I'm curious about what specialties you're all coming from so that I can kind of get a feel for what kind of groups you are thinking about starting. We're going to go through a lot of the essential components of setting it up. But first, I'm going to open up a poll just to see what are your biggest challenges in facilitating group therapy sessions. I know for some people, group therapy is it. They love it. It's just kind of the one that they always kind of lean toward, much like some of us would go toward narrative therapy or CBT. Group therapy seems to be kind of the modality of choice, but for others, it can pose some challenges. So I am curious, what do you struggle with if you are facilitating groups? If not, we're starting from scratch, and that's great as well. While you fill out that poll, I am going to skip my intro because Angela did an incredible job, but I will go to the agenda. So we are going to set a foundational understanding for group therapy, and then kind of transition into group dynamics, because if we don't understand how groups work together and what some essential components of that are, it's very difficult to facilitate groups. Then we'll go into selection and screening. So thinking through, while you're bringing people into your therapy group, not everybody is going to fit. It's not going to always make sense for them to be in there, but perhaps the next, or perhaps one-on-one or a different setting would match their needs best. Then structure and planning. We're going to give kind of a sample outline of what a typical therapy group session can look like. And then I'll give you some facilitation techniques to really help you along the way. We'll then have our presentation from Sanjeev, and then we'll have questions so I can review all the questions while he's presenting and get to as many as possible. We do have a lot of content to get through, so I'm going to go. And feel free to drop all of your questions in the Q&A box so I can keep track of them. If it's in the chat, it's harder for me to find them when the time comes. So make sure you're dropping them in that Q&A section. So, excuse me, I am seeing answers throughout the polls. Ensuring active participation is absolutely a difficulty, and that definitely depends on what is the topic you're talking about? What's the comfortability of the group? Do you have a good variety of people who are very good at starting a conversation and ones who are not so great, so that you kind of have some members pulling participation from each other because you don't want to be doing all that work, right? Maintaining engagement over time, absolutely. Once the new wears off and people are kind of getting into the rhythm, how do you keep them engaged? All really valid questions. And screening, selecting appropriate participants, yes. So all of these seem to be typical challenges, and we will address these. If you have a very specific question, drop it in the Q&A so I can help you out with that as best as I can. Okay, so now we're going to hop into... Oh, I also just want to let you all know we have a very comprehensive starter kit for group therapy. So if this is something that you're really wanting to dig into, we have blogs, worksheets, so many things that you can utilize. Just go ahead and download that. It is in the handout section, I believe, of the presentation. Yes, I know, I see it. So we're going to go into foundations of group therapy first. First of all, what is group therapy? I think there can be a little bit of confusion in regard to differentiating between group therapy and support groups. It is really important that we don't convolute the two. Support groups are socially based, supportive environments, more free-flowing, open. People can come in and out. It's less structure. And very much just meant to provide a safe space for individuals with shared experiences to process. Whereas group therapy, you are taking individual treatment from one person and you're putting them in a group and you're treating them all together. So you are acting as a therapist, not a facilitator of a support group. And those are two very different things. If you've done each, you know that the lift in therapy group is heavier. Versus support groups, you're really just helping people talk to each other. And that can be easier. Sometimes it can be more difficult depending on the population, teenagers specifically. That is a very difficult group to facilitate. So we also have a couple like high level where you see group therapy the most often. Typically we see trauma and PTSD, anxiety, depression. And then for myself, I facilitate group therapy in grief very often because I see that shared experience and the ability to be understood, seen, and feel like you're not alone in an experience is an essential component. So that's something I utilize quite a lot. It is very effective in a variety of conditions, but not everybody is going to thrive in a group therapy setting. And so it can be very valuable, and we'll talk through the benefits of that. The core principles include, so what we really want to do when we're creating a group therapy setting is make sure that we understand what group therapy is for. There are very high acuity clients or patients, however you say that, that would not be appropriate for group therapy. And we'll talk more about that during screening. And then we have people who just are not interested in a group setting. But then there's this subset of individuals who really crave a shared experience, a supportive space around people who can relate to their experience. They also thrive in a setting where the problem solving isn't just on them and on their plate, and they can really listen to what other people are saying and learn from each other throughout that problem solving process. It builds community. And then also you want to pay attention to that removal of isolation. That is a really important part of group therapy. You're going to want to see that in people who are generally isolated. So for example, through depression, anxiety, grief, those communities are incredibly isolated by nature of that lived experience. And so you want to kind of be able to pull them together and help them work through these issues. There are so many benefits to individuals as well as the therapist in group therapy. So for the therapist, for our purposes, we have enhanced therapeutic outcomes. So definitely we are built within communities. And so being able to have group therapy where people are really reflecting with each other, working through problems, you will see if you are selecting, if your selection process and your structure is right on, you will see enhanced outcomes. There's also an accessibility and cost effectiveness. So we can typically, because you're doing therapy with these individuals. And so you're able to bill and able to see multiple people at one time, which is an incredible billing for you. But it is also accessible more for individuals because individual therapy will typically cost more versus group therapy. So people can access that more freely. And of course, development of social skills and coping strategies. It is one thing to talk to a client one-on-one about how to cope with a situation that is kind of difficult, have a hard conversation. It is quite another to sit in session with multiple individuals where there's a conflict and you are helping and facilitating that resolution and working through those issues, because then they're going to take that actual experience with a hand-over-hand help into the real world. We also have so many client benefits to group therapy, feeling connected, feeling helpful. We always want to feel like our experience can go forth and help the next person in line. That's just who we are as people. It also helps us feel hopeful, build communication, problem solving. Deeper understanding of ourselves can definitely come through listening to other people's experiences and kind of mulling it around in our brains and thinking, how does that apply to me and how would I react in those situations? It helps build routines, builds their feeling of capability in problem solving. It's a lower cost, and the group members really seem to help each other, and that can be so beneficial. And group dynamics are kind of this like underbelly of group therapy. When we understand how people work together, we are better able to facilitate positive group therapy. So really what we're looking at when we talk about it in a group therapy setting is just how the group works together and how individuals throughout the group will make or break a group. And why is that? There are always going to be people with stronger personalities, more forthcoming with their stories, bringing in a different lived experience. And so what you're trying to do is build a mosaic of individuals that, based on your understanding of them during the assessment intake process, you can say, okay, I can reasonably put this collection of individuals together and I can see the strengths, I can see the weaknesses, I can see what factors would create a positive group dynamic. And as the therapist, as the facilitator, you building that is foundational. So we have kind of these stages of group development, forming all the way to adjourning. So forming, of course, is the bringing together of, and in a typical social setting, that happens at work, at school, during extracurriculars or interesting activities that are outside of work and home life. Within a supportive setting, within group therapy, you are forming. So it's helping those members get to know each other and building that group. In this stage, it's really important for no one to feel othered. Your role within that is to facilitate everyone participating and joining into that forming, introducing themselves, sharing a little bit about their experiences, talking about what they hope to get out of the group, relating to each other. Storming is absolutely going to happen. And I'm a big advocate of conflict. I think that within any group setting, it's going to happen. So expecting that it will within reason, but trusting that the group members you've selected can participate in that conflict in an appropriate way, and trusting that you can help facilitate that conflict resolution is essential. but it will happen. And so just expect for it, because when we work through conflict, what is that? A rupture and repair. That's how we build relationships. That's how we build our abilities more. It's how we get deeper. It's how we get closer. It's how we bond. It's the breaking apart and the putting back together of relationships that really create a very strong group dynamic and relationship. Norming is just establishing rules. How do we relate to each other? How do we talk to each other? What content is off limits? Let's say, for example, we're in a therapy group for eating disorders. We would have rules around, like, let's not talk about weight loss numbers. Let's not talk about strategies we used when we were deep in our eating disorders. Those things we would want to talk about during that norming process to make sure that we all feel safe within that setting. Performing is, of course, when we're all doing a great job working toward those goals, and you feel it in some of those group therapy sessions. It is on, and you just feel like, wow, we really got through that content together, and you really feel that group dynamic thriving. And then, of course, group therapy does not last forever. And so always thinking through, how do we end? How do we make sure that we are measuring our goals and getting to the end in a way that is satisfactory, that we all feel relatively successful within that? So there's definitely a couple ways that we can build cohesion within the group, and you want to actively be doing that. We cannot trust that it's just going to work out, because then we're going to have more conflicts, confusion, disruption. And I don't know if you've ever been a part of a group where it's just disruption, but that can be really frustrating for other members of the group who don't want to participate in that. And so the more structure you can put around these therapy groups to really ensure everybody has a satisfying time, the better. So the first thing we can do is just structured activities to start building trust. So again, it's helping people participate. It's moving the pieces on the board to make sure everybody has a turn and everybody is able to kind of give a little of themselves and get a little from everybody else. Because if you have people in the group that are just not willing to participate, that can breach trust. It can feel very uncomfortable for the ones that are sharing. So you could, of course, utilize some tools that help facilitate conversation. Icebreakers can be very helpful. Worksheets, opening questions, check-ins. So you can build routine within your therapy group so that, let's say you have an opening question, high and low of the week. Within that, if that is kind of the structure that you've set up, your group members will go off and they'll come back to the group with an answer to that question. So it starts to build this trust of, like, I know what's expected of me. I'm not going to be blindsided by questions or lost when it comes to getting the answer on a regular basis. Next is just fostering an inclusive environment where all voices are heard. If you are on a Zoom, the hand raising tool is an incredible option for that. When you're in an in-person space, it's a little easier to read body language of, like, who's going first. But in a virtual setting, which is very common now and a great thing for accessibility, it can be difficult. So think about hand-raising features, popcorn, calling on the next person. If you're in person, passing a stick or having some kind of fidget that the person talking can be holding to indicate it is my turn. This can be really helpful when you have people who don't read those social cues so well. And then just consider barriers to communication. That can be comfortability in a group setting all the way to hearing and cognitive impairments. And so you want to be very aware when selecting your group members that you are having, if you have anyone with hearing, cognitive, language differences, that you are able to mitigate that difference so that they can participate. I live in a rural area in North Idaho, and we had someone who could not hear come to a group. And it was heartbreaking because we didn't have mechanisms in place to really support her in participating in that group. And so in that way, we really missed the ball for her. She didn't come back, and rightfully so. We found her a group that had what she needed. But Yeah, that is just so important to really make sure the group, everybody can and is willing to participate. Conflict management, as I said, I love it. I think it's really, really important. We want it to arise so that we can have that rupture and repair. But what you need to do as the facilitator, as the therapist within that setting, is address those issues right away. We don't want things to fester. What we don't want is a conflict to happen and then nothing is said about it. After group, you have a subset of support members of the therapy group talking about it, getting more upset, really ruffling it up, and then coming back, and that group dynamic has significantly shifted. So you want to nip it. Make sure you're using reflective listening. This is a skill that I believe we all have. If you do not, it's a very important skill in group therapy settings because you are not directing, but you are facilitating and you're helping kind of pull things out that need to be like high level talked about. And then, of course, setting clear boundaries. This comes in with group rules. How do we talk to each other? How do we solve conflict? And oftentimes you can work that out at the very beginning and just maintain that throughout. So selection and screening. I cannot tell you when I was a brand new grief therapist, putting groups together, I really just wanted people to come, right? I wanted the seats filled, and that was an issue because I didn't pay as much attention to that screening and selection and why the dynamics of every single person within every single group matters. Because when you have one person who is not appropriate for group, it impacts every single person's experience. It impacts outcomes, and overall, it impacts the success of the group. So what we want to look at, of course, is we want people to have some commonality, but we also want them to have differences. We want diversity of experiences, backgrounds, information, thought processes, so that we are really able to present a problem and then dig into it in a way that's diverse. Because if I'm sitting in a room full of people who just think like I do, that's not going to help me grow. It's not going to help me think about things differently. So we want diversity so that we can have a lot of viewpoints and really comprehensive problem solving. Like, you tell me how you would do this and you tell me how you would do it. And then let's chew on it for a while and figure that out. That is such an incredible experience for every single member of that group. But we also want to make sure that there is commonality, shared experience, shared goal. What are we all here in this room for? What do we have in common that at the end of the day, when we have differences of opinion, when we have conflict, what brings us together? And typically within a therapy setting, it would be, what are we all trying to accomplish here? Intake interviews are essential. I have experienced groups that people could just sign up online and there was no conversation had with a therapist to make sure that they were a good fit. And that really created some issues within the group setting. So best practice is to meet one-on-one with every person who wants to be a part of that group and do an intake interview to make sure that they are a good fit. If not, see them individually, slate them for the next therapy group. Don't say, sorry, can't help you. But let's get them into a place where they will fit best and really be successful. You're going to want to look at personal history. Motivation and goals is also very important, as well as interpersonal skills. All of these mixed together create a really great group member who can really help facilitate problem solving with the incorrect assortment. That can be really difficult to manage. When you have somebody, let's say, who has a personal history of borderline personality disorder, within a group setting, their motivation is, and this is a total fabricated person, but their motivation is to be heard and to say that their hurt is the biggest hurt and their interpersonal skills are lacking. That will be somebody who can completely tank your group. And that is very, very difficult because you cannot change certain components of a person. Would they be a better fit in a group with other people who have borderline personality disorder and do a DBT skills group. Absolutely. So just make sure that when we have buckets, people fit in the right buckets, because you don't want to just fill a seat ever. Readiness for group is also very important. We have, as far as high acuity, who need individual attention. Let's say in a group therapy setting, their loss just happened and it was a highly traumatic loss. They're not going to want to be in a group of people whose loved ones died by natural causes, a bit of time ago, softer experience. Those will oil and water. And so that person would need individual attention for a while until you could really gauge, are they ready to be in a group setting in a way that is going to be helpful for them as well as the rest of the group. So that emotional stability is very, very important. Commitment to the group. What we don't want to see is people coming into the group, coming once or twice, and then opting out. Because it breaches the trust of the rest of the group. People start to worry about each other, right? And so we want to make sure that when you are committed to the group, you are planning to come every single time. If there's a barrier to that, they might be a better fit for a next group. And then compatibility. As you're building out your group, you're constantly thinking of your roster. So you have a new person come in, and let's say you already have 5 people. This is your 6th, and this is the end, and this is the last person. And you really need somebody who's willing to have conversations with the group, help work on problem solving, and this person just isn't ready. It's not that they can't join a group eventually, but in this case, you want to keep the existing group in mind as you're building, and every single person coming in, assess that compatibility. You can, of course, use screening tools and techniques. There's, questionnaires. Have you been to a group before? Is this something that you have experience in? What is your communication style? How do you receive feedback? You can also do through observation, as well as feedback from referrals. So think about people who are referring their clients or their patients to your groups, just making sure that you're checking in with them to say, like, hey, have they been in a group setting before? What do you know about their readiness and ability to participate in group? Then we have a structure and planning. So within group therapy, as I mentioned at the beginning, group therapy is structured. It isn't something that you can just kind of like bring people together and see how it goes. You want to make sure that you have, just like you would do with an individual, a treatment plan, if you will. What are the goals of this group, and how are we going to measure that those goals are being met? When you have these and they are clearly communicated, everybody is on the same page, and we can all kind of go on that journey together. And so nothing feels like a surprise. So think about the flow of a session. With an individual, this can look really similar. But just taking that into consideration, that you have maybe 6 to 10 people who will be in that room as well. There's kind of that time piece, as well as what things are being shared within a group setting. And is that, how are you facilitating that share? So this is just kind of a sample session. You start with a check-in. You can have a high and low, and that way everybody shares, and then we kind of get a sense of where are we at this week. Do we have some members who are having a very difficult time? Are they on a low? Do we have others that are on a high? How do we manage that difference in experiences? And how is that going to look through the rest of the group? So you're able as a therapist to really gauge how everyone's doing through this check-in. Think about some kind of main activity or discussion. So what are the goals that you're working toward? What questions, what problem solving do you want everyone to chew on a bit together? And really thinking through that and making sure that you plan for enough time for the question to be raised, the group to chew, and a solution to be found insofar as we are able. And then, of course, we debrief. Just like in therapy, like check in, see how things are going. We get deep, and it's hard, and it can be conflicting, and there can be struggles with the group, and there can be communication issues, and we're really working through it. But at the end, you don't want to end here, right? You want to come back, debrief. How did that feel? How did that go? What did we learn? What do we need to feel safe in this group? What worked well? Really helping kind of come up out of that depth. So that they're not walking out in the midst of that. And then if there's homework that they can be doing, that helps reach the goals that you're working through within the therapy setting. We also want to measure progress and outcomes, and I actually have a poll for you that I want to introduce. Okay, so I'm going to start polling on this question. How do you currently measure progress and outcomes within your group therapy setting? And I think this is really interesting. There's no right or wrong answer. There is that validity in however you're measuring, as long as you are. However, if you don't have a formal process in place, it would be helpful to to put one in. So I'm just waiting for a couple answers. So we have, a couple options here on the slide: qualitative measures, feedback from the group, the participant. So it's really open-ended. How's it going for you? How are you feeling? Having discussions or even one-on-one check-ins with individual group members. Let's say you're having a 10-week therapy group, kind of at that midway point, having an individual session with everybody and saying, how is this going? Okay, great. Yeah. Some have a mixture of both. Some don't have a formal process, and that's definitely something to think about, especially if you are just starting to put the building blocks together in a group, setting up a group, making sure that you're thinking through measuring progress. So the second part is quantitative, which is just numbers, data. Are we have a standardized assessment tool for how are you feeling at the beginning of group, middle of group, end of group, so that we can kind of measure how did this go for each individual person. Thank you all for your answers. And this is just more techniques, regular feedback forms, progress tracking sheets. This isn't something you want to check in on at the end. Because what you don't want to see is some members of the group having a really poor experience, and you don't know that until the very end. So we really do want to check in throughout, get a baseline at the beginning, check in the middle, and then at the end. If in the middle things are not going the way people need them to, really tweaking and figuring out what the issue is. Here's a couple examples of progress measurement tools that you could look into. I mean, these standardized questionnaires, Google any of them and see if they kind of fit within the needs that you have. You could also create session feedback forms that people fill out at the end. Excuse me. And then group discussion. Okay. So now we'll move into facilitation techniques, and I want to introduce one more question. This is our last one. Which of the following techniques do you find most effective in building group cohesion and participation? So I'm going to talk through these slides, and then we'll kind of reflect on these different tools that you may be using. So the first thing we want to do is establish ground rules. With a therapy group without ground rules is a recipe for chaos and conflict, because people do need to know what is expected, what is allowed within the group to know how to participate and also feel safe within a group setting. So group rules benefit everybody. There are so many if you kind of consider the population that you're working with, again, like I mentioned, working in a group for eating disorders, those group rules are going to look very different than a group for individuals with depression. right? Because those populations are triggered by different things. Some components of conversations can be more difficult for one or another. So we're not going to have one standard group rule, but there are a couple touch points that in any group are likely to be very helpful. Confidentiality is the number one. What happens in group stays in group. This, like whether you know these people from outside or not, we don't talk about what goes on here. Respect, of course, punctuality is very important. What we don't want is people coming in kind of halfway through, needing to be caught up on what's going on, because that is wasteful of everybody else's time. That could be really frustrating. And the person who's late they just miss out. Active participation. This is important, and it is kind of what one of those kind of differentiators between group therapy and support groups. Active participation is a requirement of group therapy, because let's say this person who doesn't want to participate in group was in a one-on-one session and they refused to participate. You wouldn't be able to get anywhere. So moving that into a group therapy setting, really making sure that when you're doing kind of intake and putting the group together, that every single person understands that participation is a requirement. And no judgment. I think if we're all starting from a foundation of we're all doing the best we can with the information that we have, and we trust in best intentions, and we are all going to come from different backgrounds, and yet we can't judge each other for those backgrounds, beliefs, because that is not going to be helpful for the group. Building trust and safety is so important in order for group members to participate, make progress, and get what they need out of the end of the group. So we can help build that trust and safety through consistency of meetings. So if you as the facilitator are not going to be able to keep the sessions when they are, insofar as you are able, we can't control storms and natural disasters and getting super, super sick. But as much as you can, making sure that when that group is supposed to happen, it does happen. I have noticed when in between groups, kind of participants will kind of build up the readiness to come to group, and they get a call 20 minutes before group is canceled. That can really be difficult to sit with when you have prepared emotionally, mentally to be there and it doesn't happen. That can impact trust. Empathy. How do we ensure that group members are feeling seen, heard, understood, validated, that their experience is theirs, and that they are understood within this group setting? And then positive reinforcement. This is especially supportive as the facilitator, as the therapist, to have encouragement, especially those people that are not great at sharing. So when because you brought them into this group, when a person who has difficulty sharing does, really reinforcing that. Additionally, people who have trouble reading social cues and knowing when it's not their turn to talk, reinforce that when they notice it and really help them build that skill, because they're going to see that you're tracking with them, that you are caring for them throughout this experience amongst a group. So then we have engagement strategies. All of these are helpful, especially when group members are not participating, when you just have a group dynamic that for whatever reason is not as cohesive as you would hope, not as interactive as you would hope. We have icebreakers. These can always be helpful to kind of get people talking, just loosen them up a little bit. Structured activities. This can be group discussion, a collaborative task where they're working on something together, breaking into maybe smaller groups. So that's kind of like a pair and share strategy. So if it seems to be hard for everybody to share in a group, what could you do if we broke them into smaller groups, and got them really talking and loosened them up a bit and then put them back in the group together. Rotating roles. So if you have somebody who, like, let's say in AA, kind of this is like a good side-by-side comparison. There's not one group leader every single time. There's not one note taker. There's not one person that brings the snacks. Like, everybody has a job to do, and you rotate, and so everybody feels a part of the group. I know for me personally, I always feel better when I know what my job is. I don't know what to do with my hands if I'm just there. And so giving people jobs and really helping them feel like this group is going to go well as a result of everybody doing the pieces that were assigned to them. And what that looks like for every group can be different. And then open-ended questions. So this can be really valuable when you're sitting in a group and somebody says something, right? They share a really difficult situation that they had and nobody reflects, nobody answers. There really isn't conversation going. And this can happen early in the group. And so asking open-ended questions like, what do we all think about this? How are we reading this experience? What would this feel like if it happened to you? So that it kind of pulls out that empathy piece. It gets people thinking about, what would I do in this situation? Or have I been in this situation before? And kind of being able to mull it over together. But it brings out that, like, oh, well, if this were me, then they can kind of talk through it, and it makes it a little bit easier. So going into the poll, I am seeing icebreakers and structured activities and open-ended questions and group discussion definitely as the primaries. And I think those are definitely the most common and typically will do the trick. The other options are definitely useful in situations where it is more like of a difficult group and you're really needing to come up with some creative strategies. I really do suggest the pair and share. People tend to feel like, especially if your group is bigger, breaking off into smaller and just really helping people connect with each other one-on-one can be helpful. Giving people a buddy never hurts. There's cinnamon in my coffee. It's making me cough. Okay. So then, again, as the therapist and facilitator of this group, your role is not necessarily to be in the weeds with everybody. What it is to come out at kind of like this overarching facilitating and making sure that you have a good read on what is going on for each individual within that group. So you're sitting there and everyone's talking and you're noticing somebody is really sharing a lot. Another person is not sharing and they look uncomfortable. One seems really sleepy today and another one looks mad. You, as the facilitator and therapist, just making sure you are reading that energy and you are kind of turning the dials through the questions you're asking, through the facilitation, through activities, that you are knowing what is going on for each member of this group and kind of helping them all lean in. And intervening when necessary. It's not always necessary for you to help, but in situations like specifically, let's say, one person is sharing like they have taken up the majority of the time, which in a lot of cases that would be too long, right? But people are feeling frustrated or they're disengaged or they're checked out. You can intervene and say, oh my gosh, well, thank you so much for sharing. Let's let another person have a turn, and making sure that you are, number one, reinforcing the group rules and norms, but also showing the other group members that you are caring for them as well. Like every time we intervene, we want to make sure that it helps people feel more in than out. Pacing. So again, that makes sure not one person is taking over the entire group, oversharing, because that helps maintain engagement. As if one person is sharing the entire time, I'm checked out, right? Not everyone's going to have a turn. That can be difficult. It also can hurt people wanting to come back to group. So just making sure that you're really paying attention to the time being taken. And then if needed, incorporating like short breaks. If you have a really intense group, I mentioned earlier DBT, that is a intense processing group with a lot of really intense feelings. And so sometimes it's important to kind of plan breaks out so we can take a deep breath, get some fresh air, and come back and be engaged as well. So just kind of thinking about that as far as how heavy is the content, how intense is today feeling. So then we have, I know there were questions and saying like one of your biggest issues is resistance and disengagement. And that is, I mean, it can happen. I think depending on a couple of factors. If this group is voluntary, that is a different conversation with an individual group member who is potentially checking out. What's going on? What about this didn't meet your needs? How can I help you come back because you made this commitment? Versus, let's say it's a court-ordered group therapy where this person doesn't want to be there in the first place. That's a different conversation, of course. But just kind of thinking through, where is this resistance coming from? And how do we mitigate that? Because when one person disengages, it kind of acts as a magnet, right? For others to potentially disengage. So we really want to be managing that, not just kind of saying, well, if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. So first we want to look at what are the underlying reasons. What has made them disengaged? Was there a conflict that wasn't resolved? Is there like a difference that is making them feel unseen? So kind of looking at that, bringing them back in through kind of exposing them through participation, like calling on them, really helping them feel like a part of it, integral part, validating the feelings of disengagement. This is hard. This doesn't feel good. We aren't here because we all know how to do it inherently. It's going to take time. And then setting some small goals for them specifically. What would it look like for a session to feel successful to you? What would it feel like to be able to build this skill with your group? Let's work on that. And so just kind of setting like these smaller touch points to bring them back in. So then we have more, I'm looking at the time. So re-engaging. So just making sure that we are, again, pulling them back in, asking them specific questions, checking in on them more regularly, because then that kind of makes them feel like a part of it. Peer support can be helpful. Again, having a buddy can help. So you have somebody who absolutely doesn't want to be there, and you have another person with kind of like similar energy. You know when people are going to kind of match each other, and then helping them facilitate integrating back into the group. And then making sure that the content you're sharing feels relevant to the people. It could be that this group had an ambiguous title and somebody signed up and they didn't totally get what they were trying to learn. What about the group is relevant to the person that is in there? You didn't invite them in because they didn't belong, right? And then, of course, conflict resolution strategies, always. So make sure if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. I'm going to pass it over to Sanjeev to do a demo for you all. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. I just want to make sure my audio is working. Can you hear me okay, everybody?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Kaylee, that was amazing information. I feel like you set up the playbook to set up our practices with group therapy beautifully. So thank you so much. All right, what I'm going to go into is our iConotes Plus application. This is our newer application, and I'm going to demonstrate the group therapy feature. I'm going to give an abbreviated demo of our group therapy feature in iConotes Plus. If you'd like to see more, definitely reach out to us and we can set up a demo or a call. But I'm going to go ahead and just dive right into it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Give me a second. And Kaylee, maybe you can let me know if you can see my screen okay.
I can see it.
Wonderful. All right, so when you first log in as a user for iConotes Plus, you're presented with the dashboard. On the left-hand side, you'll see an icon that says Group Therapy Groups. You can click on that, and that's where you would create your therapy group. And also you can actually conduct your sessions directly from this module here. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is from the calendar. So you can schedule a session, a group appointment, and add multiple participants to the group appointment and schedule it that way. So there are multiple ways to kickstart your group session there. I am going to navigate to the settings section because I want to show you one thing here. In the settings, under practice settings here, you will see a link here that says therapy groups, and this is where you can create your therapy. So I have one here saying that says group 1, and I titled this group therapy Together We Thrive. So maybe some of our group therapies are branded, right? And we put that on our website. So this one is Together We Thrive. Maybe it's a stress management group therapy. So I can edit this and I can add participants, and I can also configure the CPT and service codes. So what a beautiful thing of our group therapy feature is that you can auto set a CPT code if you're billing to insurances, and this can automatically go into your billing workflow. So it's all automated. So here at the top, I already titled this group name, so I'm just editing it here. I can add a description. I can provide a location if it's in person or even if it's telehealth. I have clinician here and organization member. This is really key. So you can add staff members of your practice as additional organization members. So perhaps you're in person doing a group therapy session and you as a clinician needs to focus on the actual group therapy session, and you have an organization or a staff member there who could be documenting or helping you conduct the group therapy session. And I already mentioned the service code. You can add a service code there, and you can go ahead and click on save. Here at the bottom, I can add more participants. So I can go ahead and let's see, I have John Doe, Michael Smith. I can go ahead and add Jane Doe here and click add. What's kind of nice to see is where their city, state, and zip, where they're located as well. So I can go ahead and save this. So now I have a therapy group configured here. I can also configure group rosters as well. I'm going to hold off on that due to time. So I'm just going to go straight to scheduling a appointment, group therapy appointment. Again, if I went to therapy groups, I can also create the therapy group from there as well, just as a side note there. So I'm going to go ahead and go to calendar, and I'm going to go ahead and schedule a group therapy session from 1 to 2. So I pick the time on the calendar. I click on group on the right-hand side. I select Together We Thrive. Once I select the group, you'll see the participants auto-populate. And I can X out of these if I don't want them to show up there. I can clear all participants and add custom ones for my patient database, or I can just go ahead and reschedule it and reuse the group therapy participants. So I go ahead and select group 1, and again, they're all populated here. I can also add additional participants to that specific session. So I'm setting up the session here. So I have the provider, that's myself, the appointment time, appointment type. I don't have it configured, but in person, location, start time, and I would have to set up an appointment type there, but you can kind of get an idea there. So I can go ahead and set up an appointment type. So we have group therapy, and we also have appointment type specifically for group appointment. So I could say that this is 60 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and add that. Go back to the calendar here, go to 1 to 2, and now I'll be able to, you can see how easy it is to use this. I'm going pretty quick here. So I have the appointment type group therapy 60 minutes today starting at 1 o'clock, and go ahead and click on create appointment. All right, so I have my group therapy session scheduled here. If I click on it, I can actually track attendance of the participants of the group. So I click on track attendance, and I can select the clients who did not attend the session. So I can go ahead and select Jane Doe did not attend the session. If I click save here, you'll notice that that's now saved in the system. And if I go back to it, you'll see it's there. And I can go ahead and say that the participants have arrived. All right. I'm going to now go to therapy groups on the left-hand side. And what I'm going to do is select Together We Thrive. That's my stress management group. And you'll notice here the top row is the appointment that I scheduled today for 7:30. The previous 2 rows here are previous sessions that I had with that group. So I'm going to go ahead and select this appointment because they have all arrived except for Jane Doe. As you notice, my front desk has automatically said that, Jane Doe has not arrived, she's absent, or the clinician has entered that if it's a one provider group there. So automatically selected as absent from the calendar. But John Doe and Michael Smith are here. All right. So at this point, I'm able to manage the participants. I can add more participants. Let's say we had a walk-in or somebody called in maybe 30 minutes before the session and said, hey, do you have availability for this group therapy session? And I didn't get a chance to add them to the group therapy. I can add the participant here and add another person to the group therapy session. So there's a lot of flexibility here, which is great. At this point, I have 3 ways to document notes. 1, I can enter personal remarks from the group therapy session by clicking on the Enter Remarks button. And I can click here and be able to document the information. So Jane spoke of feelings of dependency today during the session. Click Save. I can go on to Jane, the rest of these. Obviously, Jane is not present, so I shouldn't have entered that, but I'm going to go ahead and skip that and go to John Doe here. I'm going to go ahead and select this. And this is a stress management session, but let's say they have multifactorial things going on. So I have John Doe spoke of feelings of depression today, and Michael Smith, I don't have any personal remarks there. Near at the bottom here, I have enter session remarks. This will go to all of the participants. So this is where I would document the group therapy session, the remarks for that. So I'm going to go ahead and schedule and document the type of session it was. So let's say activity. We did exercise to get the group a little bit more comfortable and less stressed. There's other different types of therapy types. And then here at the bottom, I can copy and paste if I have a set instructions that I typically do, and I have that already set up. So for my stress management group, I have instructions, begin with a 5-minute guided breathing exercise. Each participant will share their experiences and challenges from the past week, discuss common stressors and coping mechanisms, and conclude with a 10-minute mindful meditation. So that's the instructions for my session. And let's say near the end, I wanted to document the remarks. So I have all the remarks documented here. All participants were actively engaged throughout the session. I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and generate the notes for each of these patients or clients here. So now I have the notes for each of these clients, and I can go into the work area and view the session here. I have the remarks at the top here. I have the instructions that led the group therapy session. And at this point, I can add specific notes for this specific individual, again, if I'd like to. If not, I can go ahead and compile and preview here. So I could compile and preview, and I can continue to the next note, and I can return to the previous therapy group session. So if I go here, I can return back to the therapy group session, and you'll see here the note is already compiled. So I would do that on each individual. And then what I would do is sign the note, and you'll see the signed note as well. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a previous note that was created. So here I have the group therapy session, stress management. Michael spoke of feelings of stress today during the session. Here are the instructions for that session. So I can go ahead and electronically sign this note. And this would be also ready for co-signatures as well. So if there's other clinicians that were part of that group therapy session, I can also request them to have a signature on that note. And this is also ready for me to generate an invoice or send it to the insurance company as well. So that wraps up the quick demo, and I think I ended right on time. So I'm going to pass this back to you, Kaylee.
Thanks so much, Sanjeev. We are out of time. I've been working a little bit on answering questions in the Q&A box, and we are out of time. So other than that, I just really appreciate you all being here. Please, I think a lot of your questions can also be answered within the toolkit or the starter kit that we've provided. So make sure that you peruse that.
Kaylee, could you do one thing? Show them the last slide of where they can email to if they're interested in seeing the actual application or sign up for early adopter. So you can email sales@iconnotes.com, everybody in the audience, if you want to request early adoption of the group therapy module. So this is something we're recently releasing on our new product. So definitely reach out to us if you want to give it a shot. So sorry, Kaylee, back to you.
No problem. No problem. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you at the next webinar. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.